let's talk some history. Some Pokemon history. What's going on, guys? Joe R, Vintage Pokemon, is back, and we're going to be taking a look at a Pokemon history video of gray stamps. We've already done an episode on gray stamps in the past, but today we're going to be taking more of a look back at the history of gray stamps, what you can find them on, and do they exist for other sets as well. We'll recap how to identify them, but if you want to see a more detailed video about gray stamps and how to identify them, you actually check out the link that I've got on screen for you, and that'll send you to where you can see all about gray stamps and how to identify them. On screen, you'll notice that we do have two first edition base set Raichu cards. Now, the term gray stamp specifically refers to the shading or darkness of the stamp on the card. We're talking about the first edition symbol that you see here. And you'll notice on this particular pair of Raichus, the one on the right is noticeably grayer or lacking in ink compared to the one on the left. Hence why it is considered a gray stamp Pokemon card. And the shading of the stamp can vary quite a bit, but this one, without question, is definitely a gray stamp. You can see it is most definitely a shade of gray. It most definitely lacks in that ink, and there is a wide variety of how gray the stamp can actually be. But I typically consider the grayest of stamps to be true gray stamp Pokemon cards. Now you'll notice that both of these Raichus on screen are thin stamp Raichu cards. And what I mean by thin stamp is there are two types of stamps in first edition base. There are thick stamp cards and there are thin stamp cards for the first edition symbol. Thick stamps refer to the thickness, how fat the number 1 is in the first edition symbol itself. And here you can see that 1 is actually very thin. So it doesn't refer to it being bold or not bold. It refers to how fat the 1 is. And these are both thin stamp first edition cards because they're very thin in nature. And so the first thing we should actually note is that thick stamps on the holo cards are typically not found because they're only on the thin stamps. So you'll notice that this is a thin stamp Raichu that has a gray stamp, and you can only find gray stamps, as far as we know, on thin stamp first edition base set cards. You will not find any thick stamps as gray stamp Pokemon cards. As far as we know, the non-holo rares of the first edition base set are also not going to ever have any gray stamps. It is pretty well documented that the rares from the set cannot be gray stamp Pokemon cards. We're not really sure why that is. You just can't find rares as gray stamps. And if you do, you definitely have an oddity on your hands because it almost is exclusively the thin stamp holographic cards that can be gray stamps and the commons and uncommons and trainers that can be gray stamps, as well as the energy cards that can be gray stamps. But rares and thick stamp holographics are out as far as first edition base set is concerned. And in the back here, you'll notice that we do have some additional examples of gray stamp Pokemon cards. We've got a pair of Kadabras here. And you can see if we take a look at these, and you can see what I mean by there is definitely a variety as far as what is gray and not gray. The card on the left is slightly darker than the card on the right. This is a gray stamp on the right-hand side. This is a standard, I guess you called regular amount of ink on the card on the left. So there we have an example featuring two Kadabras, both gray and not gray, and this is an example featuring Staryu, a little easier to see because the backing is a little bit lighter as well. The card on the left, not a gray stamp. The card on the right is the gray stamp. You can see we put those two ones right next to each other. You can see that they are indeed gray stamp on the right, and we've got the standard stamp on the left. The base set is the only set where you can reasonably collect gray stamps for every card, with the exception of those that we've already noted. Other sets can have gray stamps, and I'll actually flash a couple examples on the page here, but they are fairly sporadic and not nearly as numerous as first edition base set. So actually a really notable collector in the hobby, Gemmintpokemon, he's got his own video on gray stamps where he shows off just a ton of them. He actually has a really wide-ranging collection that spans over commons, uncommons, holographic cards, and he kind of shows that you can reasonably collect all of the cards we've noted as gray stamps. It would be extremely difficult to do that for other sets, even if those other sets do have some gray stamps. I know another notable set is the Skyridge set, although it has been shown that other sets that do also include gray stamps are Team Rocket is known to have smudged first edition stamps. Gym Heroes can have gray first edition stamps. Neo Genesis can have gray first edition stamps. And of course, the Skyridge set symbol is known to have some gray varieties as well. And again, we're not talking about whole cards that are gray text all around. We're talking really just about that stamp itself. And we're also not talking about cards that are missing like an ink layer from the holographic. We're just talking about first edition base set. But if you want to see a ton of gray stamp cards, just to show how you can collect almost the entire first edition base set as gray stamp cards, with of course again the exceptions that we noted, check out the gray stamp video done by Gemmintpokemon, because he shows off so many cards, and it's really amazing to see his entire collection out in the open like that. We also know, and you can see here, we've got a Pikachu. We'll pull that out. This is a Pikachu Yellow Cheeks, and you know that in the first edition base set, you can have both a Yellow Cheeks and a Red Cheeks. This particular variety is a gray stamp Yellow Cheeks Pikachu, and I don't have another one to compare with, so it is a little bit tough. You kind of have to take my word for it that this is a gray stamp Yellow Cheeks Pikachu. You cannot actually find the Red Cheeks variety as a gray stamp. It is pretty well documented that there are either very, very few or almost no Red Cheek Pikachus with a gray stamp, which is odd because, like we said, almost all of the gray stamps that we know of for first edition base set are included on common cards, uncommon cards, trainers, energies, and the thin stamp holographic cards like our Raichu right here. But it's weird that the Red Cheeks Pikachu also cannot be found with a gray stamp. Maybe it's because it was early in the printing of the first edition base set. It's really hard to know for sure. The actual origin of gray stamps is not completely known. It's actually completely unknown, but it is speculated that it might be caused by low ink printing or having wet ink rub off on the back of other cards. This is why some cards actually do have ink blotches on their back side relative to the type of card, depending on the stamp location. And I actually have an example of this for you guys to check out. So you'll notice I have a first edition Ivysaur here. This is not a gray stamp Ivysaur, but what makes this Ivysaur special is that on its backside, you'll notice that there is an ink blotch in the top right-hand corner. And while the location is not perfect, it is in pretty close proximity to the location of first edition stamps on energy cards. Energy cards had their first edition stamp in the top right-hand corner. So it's interesting that this card has a smudge specifically on the top right-hand corner as well, even if it doesn't match up perfectly. Because remember, the idea is that maybe these were just laying on top of each other, or maybe they slid over each other. Somehow this got smudged on its backside during the either resting process or after the printing of the stamp process. And it's hypothesized that that energy may be a gray stamp as a result, because it had some of its ink blotched off onto this card on its backside. That's a hypothesis anyway. The fact of the matter is there are apparently way more gray stamps than examples of cards with that blotching on the back of them. So that's not a set in stone theory by any stretch of the imagination. It certainly appears that there are more gray stamp cards than cards with blotches on their backside. So as far as we know, that's all we have to say about gray stamps. We know that they exist on other sets, but first edition base set, definitely the most well documented, most well known. Again, can't find them on thick stamp holographic cards, and you can't find them on the rares either, maybe outside of the extreme oddity, but as far as we know, you only find them on commons, uncommons, trainers, and the energy cards. And of course, can't find it, it seems, on the Red Cheeks Pikachu either, but definitely a cool thing to collect. Awesome niche collection to go for if you are interested in first edition base set. And I hope you guys do check out Gemmintpokemon's video or my other video on how to not only identify gray stamps, but also how to identify thick and thin stamps as well. Check those out. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video of Pokemon history, and we'll catch you all next time for another good time. See you around. Joe R. out.